Yeah, I just want to say something about the um, the thing about the neighborhood and certain factors about making it greater beyond internet protocol of a local area network, and the absolute values um, at a horizontal representative. Now, I don't know if I'd really choose the word representative, although the Israeli flag. I mean, if it's some idea of making it greater beyond internet protocol or local area network, the thing about the separation between church and state and 12 Federal Reserve Banks as compared to the United States codes annotated or a point of origin in the way of Israel being 64 or an American, or what the deal is about the commercial venue and the European standards that involving the EuroDollar and the International Electronic Engineering and a symbolic representation of the European standard that way of the 240 volt of a commercial venue of living quarter um, as compared to the 177 volt. Um, I mean, in my mind, it seems to me, the symbolic representation on the backside of the US $1, the connectivity between money and, going beyond electronic copy in Houston, Texas, and we International, and the fact about, some idea of like controlling, an overabundant amount of ground seem to be the thing about the difference in voltage regulation as compared to like I would call it like what capacitors do in circuit providing a constant at a set rating for each designated circuit. Um, Yet it seems to be the 240 volt of the European standard that actually uses a symbolic representation that's so pretty much a standard at 240 or the 24. Similarly, the big deal about the whole homeowners association, GMAC, General Motors Acceptance Corporation, IEEE, the International Electronic Engineering, the Big O, making it 39 from 24. But the thing is that the 240 volts seem to be the deal about the commercial venue in a way of, in my mind, identifying a factor that goes beyond what would be considered, what I've seen considerable amount of in commercial venue, whether it's just an idea of a public um, or even a private commercial, not necessarily a living quarter yet. I've seen and what's in my mind what would have been automatically 177 volt standard. The thing about the alphanumerics, okay, is the thing about 177 minutes left is subliminal message and a telepathic power, minus the 26 thing. The God game card lie, dog god and all that stuff about minus 26, 177. The thing is that ultimately it got to the thing about the alphanumerics. There being some idea of the American English standard of 177 volt involving like alphanumerics and linguistics as compared to a living quarter, predominantly, and European standard shows the symbolic representation on the backside of the US $1 and the connectivity of the EuroDollar that way of the alphanumerics of 177 as an international electronic engineering standard and yet European in the way of like what would be ultimately the Statue of Liberty and the difference between a pylon and a cone and a point of origin being a seven. Some people call them pylons, spikes, or whatever the case is, but it's the 7 point crown of the Statue of Liberty and the seven layers of the atmosphere in Europe, the seven nations. There's been the thought of like misappropriation, allocation of information, identifying normally, even on world news and national news, as nations identified and referred to as countries. Yet at the same time, doesn't even suggest that a province would even reflect a golf course, predominantly of like landscaping. And the thing about world history, it seemed to be the big deal about the color code of the pastel green identifying the province that way. And truthfully, what that is to like a one Justice Park as compared to my thought of there's an uptown mall called the Park and the George R. Brown. It used to be like in perfect plain view. Like when I been there, I was like a cameraman for like an outdoor concert in front of the George R. Brown Convention Center. In any case, like the Hilton is on one side. I think it's on the south side, and the George R. Brown Convention on the east side, then the park, on the west side in Georgia Center. And from that point of view, you can see, the park, and it's uptown like mall in that area, and several other factors, including, what seems to be the deal about, almost like Kobe ID 19 and Brown being 72, like the George R. Brown almost representing some idea of the penny, Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, the penny, and the thing about the George Washington, and the thing about the George Washington being like the first president, yet Abraham Lincoln's like the first. Excuse me. Any case, yeah, I'm really getting kind of like not fun about having to clear my throat. Yeah, so like that's really not cool anyway. But anyway, yeah, so like Abraham Lincoln kind of like represents like the thing about the one is one, and the ratio like the misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi being like an international superstar or international space station or international secret service as compared to supplemental security income or superstar intelligence or HTTP code // and the code being the idea of like even a ratio that way or scale or what access easement is as a // in my mind automatically the // is 22.5 degrees and the thing about the color being like some idea of like Geneva, Switzerland, like wise the Swiss Klondike bar, and the deal about the ice capades and immigration customs enforcement that would represent some idea of like the import and export of like what tariff is to like protected or not protected U.S. patented products imported and exported, or likewise other manufacturers that way involving its tariff and towing in maritime law. But the thing is that Israel seemed to be the deal about the neighborhood, and it seemed to be like a phenomenally huge secret of neighborhoods. I mean, it ultimately seems to be the whole entire point of some idea of like PG-13 and like W2 form, or the carbon footprint on the front lines of the beach ride, or some idea of like of a what would be experiencing some idea of like a constitutional law as comparative description of what participation means, more so of the side of like participation and some idea of like earning the experience as compared to given as some idea of like I've heard it referred to, and really I don't have to agree with the thought of like living life on life's terms, like just some idea of the freedom of speech and freedom of press, and or what the carbon footprint would only mean to the freedom in that way, just knowing what intellectual property and meaning of value and content is that way, and all that freedom. I mean, in that way. The thought of that, like if it's ultimately getting to the thought of like the carbon footprint representing some idea of like a VIN number or a preliminary prejudice of a registration, preliminary prejudice of product registration of a birth certificate is a thing that seemed to be like the idea of like in my mind, Israel being the idea of like the neighborhood and absolute values of getting beyond what seemed to be a phenomenally huge secret of neighborhoods. More so, it seemed to be like the deal about, what the deal is about television programming that way, or some idea of the method of banking, or some religious factor, or what chartering, districting, and zoning might only mean. I mean, if at all, a known fact at all. I mean, but it seems to be chartering, districting, and zoning only seems to be the thought of maybe only what intellectual potential only seems to be of a, I don't want to call it limitations based upon a degree level of reputable standards of consensual participation. And, I mentioned a little bit earlier about, the deal about the electronic fish being a schematic symbolic representation of Christianity being like the fish, like a half cycle above, half cycle below, and the now like an equal, like McDonald golden arches being side by side, but doesn't give the impression of measuring one cycle in frequency and oscillation that would represent the idea of a degree level of representation of consensual participation, like an alignment in a parallel universe, and looking like the symbolic electronic fish, you know, the Christianity symbolic symbol that many people have on their cars, okay? And in that way, it seemed to be like the deal about the only thing about the latitude and the equator being the 90 degree of what, you know, some idea of like military time. And, you know, I mean, if it's just like a demanded requirement, I mean, I see like all the generations thing about of neighborhoods, or, you know, what political science may have introduced as some idea of family law. I mean, if there's any reality that is truthfully anything other than, you know, some idea of maybe only if the PTA, you know, at some certain time only distinguish from maybe what their neighborhood might mean, just watching, you know, what television programming only means in their neighborhood. Um, Not really, you know, I thought of like a, you know, I mean, you know, at some extent, I mean, well, yeah. The thing is that it seemed to be like really the difference between whether or not if a preliminary prejudice is a product registration of a birth certificate would only mean what a carbon footprint only means, um, designating some idea of transparency of like a, whether any, you know, idea of the carbon footprint would only represent maybe California in the form of the Alphanumerics of, you know, carbon footprint being purple. And normally, um, you know, my thought about California and some idea of Oldsmobile Delta 88. And think about the New Deal Act. I mean, if the Oldsmobile Delta 88 only represents an alphanumeric value of like 69 in Texas, um, in Mexico, or some idea like a history of the U.S. dollar below the equator. And the thing of it is that it seems to be like really some idea of like even the Better Business Bureau and business law that represents some idea of the operator, um, or, you know, some other factor of like whether or not if even a charter district in zone idea would only be maybe the thought of maybe even a VPN as a vice president network via plenipotentiary network in the form of, you know, some idea of a simulcast, you know, or what Latin Urban League seems to be, you know, maybe the naivety of like, you know, some idea of like some neutral issue that would reflect some idea of an equator like in like Pearland, Texas, or, you know, even some idea like, you know, some amphibious deal about even I-10 and computer programming with, you know, the binary numbers of 1 and 0. And some thought, you know, all the way from Los Angeles to Florida. Well, anyway, yeah, so like, anyway, it's like thinking about Israel in the way of like the separation between church and state. The United States Code's annotated as compared to, you know, the King James Version Bible represented the red letters as compared to the Book of Mormon, Mormon being 88, and certain factors, you know, the thing about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and all that stuff about that. It's predominantly normally identified as a salmon, you know, swimming upstream, and like, you know, like a flying fish, you know, like climbing a ladder on the rivers, swimming upstream, called a ladder. But the thing with it is that somewhere in my mind, it seemed to be that, you know, the idea of prepaid postage of Calamity Jane once again in the Pearl. That way, or, you know, thought of the baptism thing about the river, but the thing, but it seemed to be, you know, so very much it seemed to be like the idea of like McDonald's Golden Arches, or some idea of like, you know, being baptized during the gold rush, and what the stagecoach is, and some idea between like John Wayne and like Wyatt Earp, and, you know, the hop sing thing of, you know, the jaywalk, or, you know, domicile head of household representative, you know, the walk, and you know, the orientation once again, you know, going through the entire situation again, the jaywalk being some idea of like a, you know, not jaywalking in the form of like walking, but like a amphibious in a way of what, you know, that is the J. Edgar Hoover and some idea of that way. But anyway, and almost like the American Idol at the same time, distinguishable, you know, beyond the front lines of the beachfront as great beyond, internet protocol of the local area network that would represent maybe towing in the way of, you know, like importing and exporting of maritime laws compared to, you know, some idea of the Federal Aviation Administration and the Federal Communications Commission. And in my mind, the thing about, you know, AAA, yeah, in my mind, it seemed to be, you know, the thing about it. In any case, but it seemed to be ultimately some idea of like a point of origin of like, you know, whether or not if only the King James Version Bible represents some idea of like Israel being 64 and an American, or what the deal is in that way of like the Mediterranean Sea and the connectivity of the European standard and the EuroDollar. Um, Likewise, in that way, in the international electrical electronic engineering of standardization, in the form of something beyond a method of banking, like paper rate would even suggest, normally of a checking account, or some idea like some idea like even Regions has the prepaid, um, now card about like not a checking account at all. Um, in any case, yeah. So like it seems to be the big deal about the beyond the front lines of the beach, right? And the globalization thing about the toilet and somewhere between the white porcelain toilet and the stainless steel high-o silver thing about the toucan Sam and for Purple Mouse Majesties above the free to play in America, the new Lisa S. Grant thing, and ultimately getting to the Israeli bird called the Whoopa, and all that connectivity of the oldest governmental computer mainframe called the Whopper, and proper English numerical composition. The principle of the P being visible and silent sometimes, and sometimes visible and pronounced, as compared to, the simple difference of knowing between the county and the country. It would be that principle of the P in proper English numerical composition applied to, just that right there between the county and the country. Knowing that much about the R and what that is. Even sometimes in alphanumerics and linguistics, the proper English numerical composition of a synonym and anonym and why one pronoun, the four types of pronouns cannot be used as a subject, kind of like combination thing, and all that pi r squared factor, retro, and all that applied, and E equal MC squared, and a whole new perspective of some idea of a hypothetical metaphor. Those seem to be the three between like the pi r squared and the E equal MC squared and exponential quotients of powers of multiplication, as compared to what would be normally be identified as a variable of addition, and algebra more so. Sometimes when nomial, binomial, and trinomial seems to be the deal about placement as compared to the degree of placement, what would be maybe the idea of maybe a variable or maybe a known fact, and what would be the position of a degree, or the 0 degree being like the equator, or a point of origin in coordinates. Maybe what would maybe be some idea of like a fiscal annual as a point of like when a business actually starts or a grand opening, but likewise in a time zone of military time as a point of origin that way. And I'm almost assuming that'll be probably including, if not segregated, only military time and not necessarily in AM or PM, but maybe in combine. If it just has a significance that way. But anyway, that's just something about that, and it seemed to be some idea of a time zone in a way. And it seemed to be the deal about going through a circuit that seemed to be, ultimately in my mind, it had resulted in, the Abraham Lincoln night vision. Similarly, some idea between, like, even the U.S. $1. Abraham Lincoln being the first president and only president to study in the dark, yet, George Washington being the first president, yet Abraham Lincoln later, but, Lincoln representing the penny, and likewise another dollar. I'll actually have to think which dollar Abraham Lincoln's on anyway, but, in any case, yeah, so like, I'll have to think about that. I really know that, really I do, but anyway, yeah, so like, in any case, so like, it seems to be the big deal about the, 1 is 1, or the ratio of like, the misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi being the ISS and the SSI, and, the ACTP colon, representing, the idea of a ratio, or, what access only would mean. I'm assuming going through like some idea of like a 90 degree, the equator, and creating some idea of access of direct circuit of dimensional flaws, some idea of like point of origin of military time, going through like, a Stargate program, or, what the deal is about the immigration customs enforcement of like multinational corporations and international banking systems, and some idea of like a Alphanumerics and Paradigm, or a method of banking, that seem to be going beyond maybe, thought of like telepumping as compared to the national deficit, or available in closed caption for the hearing impaired, and combined between, the idea of like auditing, legal media, and deposition. And really, all this, depends on the degree, level of terminology, the seems in difference of where the word or the phrase is really at. And in most cases has the similarities of the same meaning, but at a degree level, a different descriptive word or phrase that way. But a practical, application applied, and I mean, the word is compatibility more so. I'm assuming a preference of a degree level, of level standards of consider participation as compared to maybe integration as just the way it is and what's involved, whether not be a preparedness, but a factor, of like the existing entire situation that way. But yeah, so like anyway, I was thinking about Israel that way because it seemed to be somewhere in a wide area network that Israel's in my mind somehow, I mean, if it's ultimately getting to, going through a circuit of like only what international monetary funds would only mean to the aggregates as compared to monetary domestic gross national product of aggregates representing, some idea of like a, something more than funding, yet representative of aggregates that way of, what a fixture in real estate would only mean, that way of like a distinguishing difference of, mechanism, tool devices and mechanisms that would identify, a method of banking or, some idea of like electronic power as compared to some idea of like a annuity as compared to Bitcoin, why Bitcoin is not cryptocurrency or, the electronic side more so of like some idea of like some people's mind might think that maybe the checking account would only maybe represent maybe the idea of what only a registered charity or a significant deposit might only mean to SAN software or storage area network, identifying maybe, the business hours of, like an ATM, not even attached, to the bank itself, or some idea of like a separation, I mean, for real, between church and state. I mean, just like the business hours of an ATM. Or, the human factor, getting beyond the ergonomics of an ATM. And, what the real deal is about, the participating factor of like the line as compared to the inclusionary rule provision or the history of a mailbox or television programming. And it seems to be, whether or not if like programming is just the idea of, what a neighborhood is or is not. And, yeah, so, but I want to include that. It's already going on like 22 minutes and like 45 seconds right now. Because it seemed to be somewhere in my mind that, I mean, if it's just ultimately going to be an issue of like, Acura, okay, I mean, all that stuff about, treatment team and all that stuff, and you got to be kidding me, but I mean, at this point, and really, it's not necessarily, my idea of like humor, or like really getting anything, other than like it would seem to be, just continual academic, just based upon my memory of like, all things that have been looked at and studied, examined analytically, symbolically, geographically, with like, degree level terminology or, some idea of like analytical reasoning that would only be sometimes, a practical application. And, you've heard it before because you had to be there. And the only way of knowing is actual, participation beyond the classroom. And even some of the information at academic level in the classroom isn't like really even like in the classroom other than like being there and really, participating in that way. But anyway, yeah, so like I said about that, because it seems that Israel has some kind of significance of the, the horizontal parameter as compared to the vertical and that way, and as far as like the neighborhood as compared to, the 177 volt identifying whether or not if a public and private issue is still the issue of like legal tender for all debt. I mean, as compared to a debit or a debt, legal tender, and if it's just really the whole idea that, that maybe legal tender for all debit and not debt at all. I just like, I mean, an entire lifespan of like, a debit, as compared to a debt, legal tender for all debt, both public and private. Huh? I mean, it should really, I mean, it seems like, it's legal tender for like all debit, So, I mean, if there's identifying some issue between Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, as compared to a debt or a debit, as some thought of legal tender in the form of an endorsement or some idea of separation, or a defector seeking amnesty, only identifying the acronym of SAN software as a storage area network as compared to securities and annuities, and like where's the endorsement go after it leaves the bank? I mean, for real, as compared to the thought of maybe some idea of constitutional amending factors to freedom of speech and freedom of press, and some idea of like having a right to assemble, and in that way, and the thing about the cumulative rollover, and the idea of like having the right to assemble that way, or intellectual means of like having fair use in that way. But in any case, yeah, so I just want to think about that because Israel seemed to have some idea of significance in my mind. Um, if it's something going through a circuit of a Stargate program, and I'm hearing like a whole bunch of really, I'm not saying it's nothing. The thing with this is, hey, like I'm 59 now, okay, years of age, and born August 1960. I've been led to believe I've been born in 1964. Yeah, August 6, 1964. I've been led to believe that, actually believe that, and yeah. Although there's been some idea like like a whether or not if a carbon footprint is the only idea of like a preliminary prejudice of product registration of birth certificate, and some idea and some like telepathic birth, and some spiritually gifted communication, okay, and some idea between the European standard of international electronic engineering representative of the C, and the symbolic representation between the C and the PTIS on the back side of the US $1 on the upper right side of the pyramid, okay, that Inuit thing about it. But the difference between the idea of papermate, represented at the back side of the US $1 bill as compared to the European standard of 240 volts, yet it presents the acronym of like 24, and whether it needs to be a zero, identifying some idea of like the alphanumerics of 108 or 64, in combine between the operator and HTTP called double forward slash, and Israel, and the American thing as compared to zero being the operator, and 108 Chevrolet and Bicentennial, and all that alphanumerics of like the deal about the Bicentennial Quarter, the drummer 13 stars, and the Statue of Liberty that way. But anyway, yeah. So like and then, anyway, so like I want to focus on the Israeli thing about the horizontal bars, and some idea of like if it's ultimately some idea of like boycott and embargo, they're making a grade, or some idea of like SSI in a way of like some economic factor that would present what would maybe be the perception of a requirement, whether or not that the misappropriation allocation of Mississippi is involving the idea of like an international superstar. The thing with this is that really it has gotten to the point of a specific and I'm not going to do it right now. I was going to, but like once again, it just seemed to be something about music video, and the alphanumerics of 177 and the telepathic power or subliminal message or mental telepathy of like the alphanumerics of 177. Okay, and the idea of a corporate term of like an entity being an eternal structure as compared to the voltage of 177 of a commercial venue. You have the same pronunciation and the same principles involved of 240 being the idea of identifying, some idea between the EuroDollar and the US dollar, and the reality between, what a commercial venue might only need to a public and private issue, not necessarily a degree level beyond, the structure itself of living quarter, or even a non-degree living quarter, not making a grade of the 240 volt. It's, in my mind, automatically, the issue between the alphanumerics of 177 and, minus 26, and being the alphanumerics of Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, and Sacred Service, and, the list goes on about U-151, yet, 240 presents the issue of, like, almost like the Ulysses S. Grant involving 240 and 50 being like Highway 290 and Austin Powers, Blue Bonnet, Imperial Eagle, and, two rectangles representing, some idea of like, yellow being 92, or Pyre Square that way, and, the four rectangles, of the Blue Bonnet Imperial Eagle represented the rectangles on the tennis court on both sides, between the singles and the doubles, and the Banks love 30 thing about it. And it seemed to be, the thing about it, And as compared to the 177 volt, it's predominantly a lot of lighting of 177 volt in commercial venues. And 247 seems to be the idea of whether or not if lighting, it's only the idea of only, what electrical and electronics is, as distinguishing whether or not if an eternal factor identified maybe more so of an entity of corporate venue as an eternal structure of like commercial venue of living quarters is some idea like something a little bit more up to date and civil as compared to a religious saying of like the 12 tribes of Israel, as the idea of like corporation being 144, or some idea the three zeros, or being like the 144,000, 12,000 each of the 12 tribes of Israel, or the corporate venue, the eternal structure being identified as an entity, yet a practical application of only 177 volts, maybe more so of like a public and private as a method of banking, identifying money as a categorization that way of alphanumerics and voltage in international electronic engineering, not having the thing about the connected to the EuroDollar, and symbolic representation of the International Electronic Engineering Organization applied beyond the paper made thing about a method of banking of a checking account, that way, and having the alphanumerics of 24, and even though Ulysses S. Grant and the America for Purple Mountains matches above the red plate, America, like the Ulysses S. Grant applied to the 240, like once again it gets to like Highway 290, Austin Powers, Boulevard Imperial Eagle, and what that is, I mean, really like human capital, identifying the acronym SAN software, as compared to a storage area network being human capital investing inside beyond some storage area network of the acronym SAN software, and to maybe more so, I mean, if it's going to be more so the endorsement side of the checking account, or maybe who's trying to kid, kind of don't be fooled by imitation just because of a carbon footprint. I mean, but hey, huh, yeah. So what was it like going through the Stargate program, right? Huh, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, yeah. Okay, in any case, yeah, so like I was thinking about that because of some idea, in that way, if it's ultimately getting to the idea of like counterbalancing the earth for perfected seasonal changes, I mean, who's doing who a favor, or is it really the thing to do or the smart thing to do, at some point? But at some point, I mean, considering as much as, and many years as I put in was studying alphanumerics and linguistics, and combined with symbolic representation involving schematics, maps, and geographic information systems, and terminology, and analytical and symbolic, and combined with like alphanumerics and linguistics, and all that analytical and proper English grammatical composition, and synonym and past, present, future, projected estimate, option, and future, and all that terminology, right? With the New York Stock Exchange in that way. Not limited to the federal open market window and the discount window, the terminology that can be found in the book of Secrets of the Temple House of Reserve Rooms of Country, involving the idea of commercial paper, sometimes not identified as a voucher, but a daily standard transaction at the bank representing some idea of value and content when trading, would be, some idea of like a, before the bell is rung, every day at the Wall Street, stock exchange. So like anyway, in that way, so like, I want to think about that because Israel seemed to be some idea like if the sky is the limit, and Israel is presenting the issue of like, well, I mean, is it really the limit? It was the idea of like identifying, a 6-point star, and making it read beyond, the idea of like somewhere in between, I mean, if the Israeli flag ultimately represents some idea of like a Christian religion, or some idea that hasn't identified, but wise when you are walking on authorized paper, or all the information provided with supplemental security income, some amphibious deal about beyond the Holy Man as some idea of some means of like not necessarily academic, and at this point in today's world, I mean, why isn't it, or some thought beyond what would only mean in my mind of the province issue of whether or not the carbon footprint might be, the only perception of going beyond the idea of the Holy Land, or some idea of like province in a pastel green, and at a minimum, beyond, all the bewildered sojourning into the wilderness thing, and finally made it way, onto the golf course, some idea like some you know, Holy Land and Province, right? On the golf course. In any case, yeah, so like, and getting all amphibious beyond the golf course, in my mind, it's like really what the deal is. I mean, if ultimately, if the golf course only represents, some idea of like landscaping or a new development or some idea of a commercial venue beyond, two 9-hole golf courses or even 18-hole golf courses of, what I've been referring to as 240 volts and the EuroDollar identifying, the International Electronic Engineering Organization standards beyond, the idea of paper made or 5610 and some idea of annotation, annotated adoption abortion or Roe v. Wade. I mean, my name is Wade, okay? And I went through like a period of like, the alphanumerics of my name, Wade Sterling Pretty being like the alphanumerics of 213 telepathic brainwaves and Chevrolet Silverado, Chevrolet Camaro, IROC Z28 and surface to air thing, and I don't want to get off into, a national security issue and actually, say surface to air missile, it's hey, it's good to see you, right? In any case, yeah, so like any case, and what I'm really getting at is that, sometimes it's ridiculously not cool, even sometimes even saying certain terms or words or phrases that's like even like, a daily standard of like world news, because ultimately it seems to be like the civil issue of like, what the deal is about national security, and obviously television programming has been a major factor. What many people have seen is like a common mainstay and ignorantly, just maybe accidentally, like repeat what they've heard on television and identify themselves as like some idea of like not the degree of a commercial venue of living quarters, beyond the neighborhood or even a 2 9-hole golf course deal, beyond some idea of like hitting made a grade beyond a holy land, some idea of province in that way of color code, of world history and world class, and then find a pastel green that way. More so of like, during the Richard Nixon deal about the celebration, 200-year celebration of America during, from 1776 to 1976, the thing about Richard Nixon that way, and the bicentennial issue, now going, beyond the new millennium, just being the year 2024, and even some idea like some predictions of like Nostradamus, and some idea, that his predictions were like considered to be accurate of up to 400 years and going beyond the new millennium. And each millennium, is like a 1,000 years and identified as the year 2000, okay? And, Nostradamus' idea of like a 400 years of accuracy into the new millennium would only suggest maybe New Mexico and maybe some naivety to alphanumerics and not the algebraic test of conversion of does or does not equal. Or, the thought of like New Mexico as compared to 69 and Texas being Mexico as compared to a degree level of reference standards, a consensual participation as like the United States, not necessarily an issue of, if it needs to be identified as a language barrier or some idea of like first, second, and third world. In that way, the thing is that the European standard identifying, the symbolic representation beyond a method of banking, it certainly places, where the New Deal Act is only some naivety of not really practically applying, New Mexico or referring to, the alphanumerics and like there's some naivety of academics and, simply and easily misinterpreted intentionally. Although 69 is Texas and Jehovah, yet Mexico likewise is an admission. And many academics have like Texas would say, well, what do you mean Texas equals 69 in Mexico? I mean, just skip algebra and algebraic test of inversion or some idea of the equal sign only being like a minus sign, only of a standard of 177 volts and some idea of public and private commercial venue, not a living quarter. And ultimately getting to, the one minus sign having the same principle of does not equal apply to, the minus sign being a big plus, and some idea of like subconscious minus chase, and some idea of like, incoherence beyond any concept of what's taught and logically believed in like driver's education in high school. And that plus sign, I don't think there's probably any better way to describe that other than with the cartoon representing the eyes as plus signs in driver's education. I mean, it seems to be, the perfect and really the only way to really explain it, because subconscious mind says, being like the Alphanumerics 181 Houston, Texas, subliminal message, selective service and electronic power, we international. Incoherence is like unbelievably unreal, far beyond probably anyone's what they've been led to believe in driver's education. But the cartoon, with the experience, it seemed to be, the hugest deal in Alphanumerics going through the circuit and like all that happening and being asleep and man, that is not funny. And in any case, it seemed to be like a deal about Vantage Love 30 in a way of like, I'm sure it's like not anything new to an eternal treasury of the military, knowing that, some of it is like so extremely intense that, some idea of like entertainment being involved with television and programming to maybe reactivate some idea of like memory. And that was like really kind of similar to, the thought of like, what participation in meant. And that seemed to be so true about, like close to a 30-year period. And absolutely, at one point when I realized that even Microsoft was like some idea, and it was like the European's wealthiest museum, and a sequencing of like screensavers. And it was that one picture of that, and that's, I really mean, I kind of suspected it, but when I saw that picture and realized that that was like some idea of like being taken there, and being able to grasp anything other than maybe the vagueness, with like some and many other locations, and watching YouTube, it seemed to be like more and more and more. So many things about YouTube, it was unreal. So in any case, so like that came to be more and more, the fact that and watching music videos and certain things on YouTube came more and more the issue, like the memory side of what the experience and at first going through it didn't even seem to be my idea of the Stargate program, but when I realized that memory had become the hugest part about that, and studying alphanumerics and linguistics, and knowing something about that with like the algebraic test of conversion of does or does not equal. And ultimately, the plus signs that are taught as the incoherence, not necessarily subconscious mind says, but very much that at the same time. Or the subconscious mind is 36 in oil. I don't want to just like throw it all off on Chase, but in that way, it's 36. The idea of like even the GIT, geospatial information technology, and I don't want to just go off into that because some idea of like diapers. Okay, it's like okay, I've been like referring to the LASIK laser corrective eye surgery. Okay, and the thing about like 1965 and the embassy and the Alphanumerics and Social Security Administration's phone number 1-800-772-1213, and it's ultimately getting to like the alphanumeric value of like 12 and 13 being LMM, like legal media. Okay. The Social Security Administration's telephone number, and ultimately, like even my birth year, getting to L64 and M65, and ultimately, like the COVID ID 19 with the cumulative rollover, 1964 being 83 and 1965 being like 84, and Austin or states being plural, or embassy, and what the deal is about and paralegal, blue bonnet and paralegal that way, and sticks of butter, now America like yellow being 92. And all that stuff about the HCPP :/, and the misappropriation allocation in Mississippi, the ISS International Superstar, International Space Station, and supplemental security income. My thing about being a drummer is like automatically my idea of like using standards that I've chosen for myself is the perfection. Yet what you're seeing me on my drums with my lighting, like you're seeing like right now behind me. It's not limited to, including sometimes like fog, sometimes fractal, graphic animation and animation as well as like lasers and what you're seeing right now, like on me and like behind me right now, and some of the lighting effects that that I use in my video. But the thing is that progressively, as I was like starting to make music videos, it's same as a portfolio. Yes, I kind of started feeling the need to like hurry up and get as much of it on there as soon as possible because everything had been going on, and some idea like I really felt the need to like do it as fast as possible. So as far as like some of the stuff that's on there, I mentioned it before that really I'm beyond like 3,000 individual songs, probably closer to maybe 250 bands, singers, and that way, ranging predominantly more so progressive rock and Christian contemporary as well as Christian rock. And my thing about my own original music is it's really kind of getting a little bit frustrating because, I like purchasing got quite a bit of like, instruments for like a recording studio, including, two synthesizers and electric guitar, combo amp, mixing board, PA system, power amp, 10,000 watt power amp, and all that stuff. And all this is going on. And it got to where I had to get a different type of transportation involving like mobility. And the idea of like, having to contend with like, maintaining, like going grocery shopping and coming back or some idea. I'm having an issue of like, what's going on with my transportation when I'm like inside grocery shopping or, shoot, I can, yeah, it really got to that point to where it's like really not cool or even leave the home. And it's causing, the deal about, other factors being on SSI, supplemental security that way, and maintaining some idea of like transportation and not be so, geographically attached like to the toilet, okay? In any case, yeah, so like, all that's been going on, I felt the need to like hurry up and get as much of it as possible. And the thing about me getting obviously recording equipment and having to use it to once again maintain some idea like my transportation and not have to like replace it or even some idea like what's going on when I leave my home and have to replace some of the musical equipment. It's so not cool. It's not funny. In any case, so like my thought and idea about having a recording studio is my perception of like like who thinks that really that they have maybe elected themselves to maybe some idea of like management, like some telepathic idea of management, some like a mood adjusting quality as access, but in any case, yeah, so like I'm trying to like really stay calm about that, okay? In any case, yeah, so like all that was like going on, but what you see on YouTube.com at my channel Wade ASV Pretty PRIDDY YouTube.com is a combination of like all that going on progressively, some idea of like having to go through the hospital for like a 16-month period, and the 15-month period it's the 1 month I didn't even have to go. The thing with it is that all that seems to be, the 15 thing about, going back all the way back to when I was like 15, and at the same time it seems to be like a picture is a picture, and all this stuff, going on, and I don't want to just like, put it off that way, and because the way I see that picture is a picture, it's like, something about that. But in any case, yeah, so like ultimately getting to some idea of, once again, the Abraham Lincoln Lincoln Continental Hood Ornament. The thing about the international financial management and the hood ornament, it seems to be the Lincoln Continental. It's the ultimate deal about Abraham Lincoln night vision, or ultimately it's kind of like almost like a baptism and like a Mormon church had been some idea of like immigration customs enforcement having some idea of a telepathic silent partnership as a claim, or some idea of breach as a defector, maybe leaving the King James Version Bible just because of baptism of an American religion at the Mormon Church. And then all of a sudden, this idea of like, psychic warrior, America's foremost psychic spy. And it's covered up the top secret Stargate program. It's ultimately been, going through a circuit and, all that, going on and getting, like the reaction, like, hey man, like what's going on, In any case, so, like it going through the Stargate program, it seemed to be like more and more the ultimate deal between whether or not if some idea of like religion had been placing a factor of immigration customs enforcement as a method of banking, or some idea of a baptism and some claim of some experience that seemed to be whether or not that international, banking systems as well as multinational corporations and jurisdictions is like some idea like creating some idea of a Stargate program, maybe as an alternative of not being an international breach of what, an endorsement, or maybe identifying U.S. dollar as a banking system, or is it really the only deal about available close contact between Henry and Perry, and not necessarily the national deficit, and some idea of like whether safety and characterization and sense of force, some idea of like a 1 cycle per second in chronological order, or in the McDonald's golden arches is a degree level reference standard of consistency as compared to the electronic schematic fish of one cycle, but in alignment of parallel universe, and some like access of a 90 degree of an equator, like getting involved, beyond the dimensional laws, having a idea of like a direct circuit beyond the equator, or what degree level only means in a neighborhood. In my mind, somehow the Israeli flag at the same time, some idea of like I don't know if I would really call it some idea of maintaining, of being afloat, or a floating account in a way of like a maritime law only issuing whether or not if a patent pending would only be the idea of whether or not if making great beyond internet protocol, local area network is only the idea of like going beyond maritime law that way, and beyond the neighborhood, and to the commercial venue thing about the alphanumerics beyond what gives the practical application of principle of like 177 volts of a commercial venue, not necessarily a living quarter, even 177 volts predominantly of a commercial venue as a living quarter is still really not the grid, and probably more so, and involving more so like personally probably everything, not a degree graduate alumni, or some idea of still a neighborhood, not necessarily above it all in that way. Like a circuit of like commercial venue of living quarter, as compared to some like idea getting all amphibious, above it all that way. And really that's what I'm looking at, and really going towards that way. But anyway, I want to include that. That's already going on 51 minutes and like 35 seconds right now. But I want to include that because I wasn't really planning on, and really it seems like here every time that I start talking, and it's almost like going longer than really I intended. But that's perfectly fine. It's just that really maintaining the attention of the audience. Yeah. Anyway, so in any case, yeah. So there it is. I'm gonna take a break. It's already like getting late. Okay. Anyway, I'll talk to you later. Okay.